Orcane is one of the more interesting characters coming from Rivals 2. From trapping to zoning and even a little bit of rushdown, Orcane's got it all. But having it all can be a bit intimidating for casual players wanting to pick up the character to fight their friends with, or for competitors wanting to dedicate their time to. I'll be fixing that today though by breaking down Orcane's general game plan, his neutral, his advantage, and disadvantage, and finally capping us off by sharing tons of fun tips and tricks that me and my friends have found over the past few months. Speaking of those friends, I want to give them a big shout out to Rimrin and Cabbage for helping us out with this video. Their socials are both linked down below. Before we dive into the deep stuff though, let's cover the basics and talk about Orcane's general game plan. Orcane's a slippery trapper and uses set play mechanics, making him pretty unique to the overall platfighter genre, but not too strange within the Rivals cast. I think this makes Orcane pretty hard to approach though for players coming from other games, since your average Smash Bros. Or Brawlhalla character plays nothing like the little dude. The core of Orcane's kit is his puddle. There's a lot of ways to use it. To keep it simple for now, Orcane wants to almost always be knocking opponents into his puddle, using it to force a defensive option or movement, and then punishing appropriately. You're probably thinking, man, that doesn't sound all that hard, and you'd be right. Until you check out the stats and see that Orcane doesn't have the best base movement, meaning it's a little tricky to force these follow-ups. This problem, however, is conveniently fixed by Orcane's Hydroplank, a tech that allows him to slide around with certain moves and actions, like strongs, grabs, shields, and spot dodges. This allows Orcane players to avoid and kite opponents in unconventional ways, as well as connect massive combos, if they can properly implement the movement alongside the moves themselves. This can only happen though if they have the tech skill and game knowledge to back it up, so don't be super hard on yourself if you don't get it down right away. This ironically takes Orcane from being one of the easier characters at lower ranks to being one of the rarer characters at top and competitive play. Now that we have a good overview of what Orcane wants to do, let's figure out what he doesn't like. Since Orcane is a bit stubby, he really relies on his opponents not being able to wall him out. Characters like Clarin and Loxodon that have big hitboxes can prove to be hard to get in on, and characters with juggle tools can also be pretty tricky for Orcane, since he doesn't have a super fast get off me tool besides Nair, and most up airs are slightly disjointed, beating out that move. Orcane also doesn't like to get parried, since projectiles are parried on frame 3. It's important as an Orcane player to not overuse those tools. It's something I'm personally guilty of, so I like to start each set off with a few low-risk bubbles to see if my opponent will choose to parry them. If they do, I try not to rely on them for the rest of the set past my punish game. Before we move on to the more advanced parts of the guide, I really quickly want to tell you about a giveaway going on the channel. I'm giving away a free Hockey Loxodon skin with the Valhalla alt. It was a limited time skin, and only a few hundred people have the alt, so all you gotta do is leave a comment on any of my videos before the mid-June patch. These giveaways are funded by y'all using code LASTSTOCK in the item shop, so thanks tons for all the support. It makes me super happy that I'm able to give back. Speaking of getting back, let's go ahead and jump back to the guide. Let's move on to breaking down Orcane's neutral. This is the most important part of the game for a character like Orcane in my opinion, since while there's a lot of depth to his advantage and disadvantage, his neutral is strong enough to consistently play outside of opponents' threat ranges, and then force opponents to come towards you, with patient play or by baiting attacks. Then, Orcane can use his burst movement and wave dash to close the gap, and get a free follow-up. When using this wave dash, I normally like to go for jabs and down tilts out of it. The burst movement and speed of the jab makes Orcane's jab one of the best in the game in my opinion. And, as we know, jabs can obviously be cancelled into a tilt. This lets Orcane line up pretty consistent down tilts and up tilts, which can both really open up your advantage state. We won't get into that just yet, but another tool that's really strong to start an advantage state, and pretty safe in neutral, is Nair. Nair is a super quick option that knocks opponents in the direction you hit them, and auto-cancels pretty early, allowing you to click it near the ground, hit fall, and then connect another, bouncing your opponent around the stage. To keep things safe, however, you can also whiff Nair and land on shield, to trick your opponent into trying to punish you, and then punish that overextension. Overall, Nair is one of, if not the best option Orcane has, so while I normally advise people to use their best options sparingly, this one I encourage you to use as much as you can. Obviously, Nair and down tilt are both low knockback moves that don't send into tumble until the mid-20s, so we gotta mix in another few options to prevent floor hugging from shutting us down at low percents. Dair and back air offer solutions to this, since they either have high knockback or different counterplay than a floor hug. I suggest mixing them into your neutral, but not over-relying on them, since I've noticed that some players find these moves to be a bit too safe or spammable and end up getting punished for overusing them both. Both of these moves, however, can lead to a solid advantage state, depending on where you are and when you use them. Down air starts to combo at later percents, but its hit stun is not consistent at lower ones. And back air can reposition enemies, drastically throwing them off, or be used as a safe poke tool when nothing else works. Speaking of poke tools, forward air isn't the worst either. It has great burst range, but I find the move to be less and less effective the better my opponent is. So I suggest relying on it more to enhance your movement, and not to necessarily use it as a way to brute force neutral or to get an easy reversal every chance you can. Grabs also deny defensive options like CC and shields that other moves don't work on 100% of the time, and because of that, I find myself using them a lot to find openings that other options wouldn't. Finally, for our last few notes on neutral, let's touch on Puddle's role in both poke and keep away aspects of the game, and how to optimally place it. To start, you should probably always have Puddle on the stage. Just in being there both threatens bubbles on a jumping opponent, since you obviously can't parry or CC in the air, and bubbles on an opponent in hit stun. We'll cover that part in a minute, so let's just focus on bubbles and neutral for now, and how to place Puddle to get the most out of them. Generally, there's 3 ways to position Puddle, with the easiest being between you and the opponent. This puts pressure on jump and neutral as I mentioned, and if they choose to run at you, they risk getting hit into the puddle and then comboed for big damage. You can also leave the puddle behind your opponent. This is great for setting up combos or threatening tech chases out of a neutral win, but it doesn't really allow Puddle to help you a ton in neutral as a set piece. Finally, your third option is to leave Puddle behind you. This makes Puddle great to fall back on, since if an opponent rushes forwards, you can always wave dash back and then get a meaty F-strong to stuff their approach. This isn't the best strategy in my opinion, but it's better than nothing. Finally, while we're on the topic of Puddle placements, remember that Puddle is also a recovery tool, meaning that in a lot of instances, especially when Orcane is at high percent or being threatened off stage, you want to have Puddle at the other side of the stage as the opponent. It's a little backwards since you can't really rely on Puddle offensively in these positions, but it goes a long way in those clutch recovery spots. Figuring out how you want to play around Puddle is really important, since it can swing a lot of interactions and change how your opponent wants to ledge trap or approach you. But before we move on, I do want to remind you that using bubbles from Puddle is super risky due to parrying and crouch canceling. It really messes up your neutral if you rely on it too much, so I suggest using the option as a mix-up, if at all. While we transition over to advantage, I do want to take a quick second to talk about Orcane's grabs. I already mentioned how great it is in neutral, and it's his best tool to deny defensive options, but its applications and advantage are pretty big too. I really like to use Orcane's up throw at lower percents if I'm looking to juggle an opponent like Crag or Edalis, and his down throw if I'm looking to tech chase. His forward and back throw both send at decent distances and get cool angles to open up custom combos with puddles, but I also like them to toss people off stage on occasion to go for early edge guards since Orcane can go super deep, especially if I've found success with those earlier in the set. Moving on to our more traditional advantage states, however, Orcane's go-to moves to start a combo besides a throw are Nair, down tilt, and up tilt. These moves all knock opponents slightly up, leaving them vulnerable to Nair follow-up. They can then hit fall and then combo from there. There's some spots where you can chain together a ton of Nairs across the stage, and times where you can land a regrab or a deadly back air on a bad DI. There's some spots as well that I like to end a combo with a forward air, especially if I feel like my opponent's starting to fall out of the combo. This stalls my opponent in place so that I can then land a hopefully lethal up air. I like to do this especially in spots where I can run off the stage or platform to help me line up the up air sweet spot a little better. You can also opt a ladder combo instead of a Nair train. I've found that Orcane normally prefers to use his ladder combos more on stages where he can reset his jump. Etherean Forest and Godai Delta can find combos with up air ending a little prematurely, compared to stages like Rockwall and Merchant Port, since the top platforms there help him turn a combo that might do 30 or 40 at most on other stages into a deadly 50-50, assuming he covers his opponent's DI right. I gotta warn, however, that this up air can be a little inconsistent. The sweet spot isn't the most generous, and the sour spot sends at a weird angle that makes comboing with it past super low percents near impossible. I normally like to try to keep characters above me in plat fighters, since you can push advantage pretty easy that way. But Orcane can have a hard time with that for sure. This is why Orcane normally wants to push opponents off stage and slowly take away their tools before he returns to stage. Let's say your opponent spins a jump. It's pretty easy to commit to hitting them for it as Orcane, and then return to the puddle. Then you can rinse and repeat the edge guard. This time, your opponent has no jump. Nair is my go-to move for this, but using Bubble Butt can help, especially when calling out telegraphed recoveries. At some angles, Bubble Butt can also confirm into back air, which is especially nasty since bair kills super early. Up air and down air are both okay to use off stage. Down air doesn't have a ton of hit stun, but it does linger for a long time. The move, however, doesn't trade the most optimally since it is a multi-hit. So in spots where I want to trade hitboxes, I prefer to spike with the bottom hit of up air. This move doesn't send super far, but if an opponent's already burned a few resources, it can be pretty deadly. As I mentioned, it's great for trades, since normally if an opponent is using an up B to recover, and you're landing on them with a spike, you'll be hit up towards the stage, and they'll be hit down into the bottom blast zone. Be sure to weigh the risks of this move, however, since if you do whiff it, you're suddenly at the bottom of the blast zone, and your ledge guard is normally over. Sometimes using Nair super low is easier to aim and gets the same job done. You can also opt to ledge trap instead of commit off stage as Orcane, which I don't personally find to be ideal, but there's not always a chance to chase someone super deep. Sometimes when recovering, opponents will miss the ledge a little bit, and poke out a little bit above it, allowing you to get a really powerful forward strong and probably seal the stock. This trick isn't consistent since obviously not all players are going to miss the ledge, but it's super helpful to keep in mind. I know that I've personally cheesed a lot of stocks this way. You can also use Puddle to trap opponents on ledge. Characters like Loxodon have a really hard time getting past bubbles here, since he's so big and a little slow. However, he can always ledge dash, CC the bubbles, and then parry if he's familiar with the matchup. So, if that does happen, I would opt on not relying it and going for a more traditional edgeguard for future recoveries. For these, I like to set puddles somewhere that I'm not comfortable covering. For example, if I want Arcane to cover a get up attack and jump, I can hold shield near ledge, and have puddle behind me to cover roll or special get up. You can flip this around too, which is what I personally prefer since it's a bit less risky and easier. Truthfully, Orcane doesn't get a ton of the landing bubbles in a lot of spots, but at ledge you can connect in Nair, up air, or up strong depending on the DI and how many bubbles connect, as well as where you're out on stage as Orcane relative to your opponent. These are all great options and allow you to take a stock or reset your ledge guard. Finally, to wrap up advantage, let's talk about kill confirms. Orcane's best kill options are found in his offstage gameplay by disrupting recoveries, but moves like back air, up strong, and forward strong, as well as his empowered forward throw and up air can all do the trick on stage. Down tilt can confirm into either up air or up strong at higher percents, and back air can be comboed into by landing bubbles on an opponent. Forward strong is also deceptively large, so if you notice an opponent is really trying to close gaps on you and not really taking their time, you can call it their recklessness with this kill option. I also really like jab F tilt at ledge, since it's not the best kill option for mid-percent foolery, but it's really consistent at higher percents and pretty easy to land. Down strong can also be set into by a variety of moves, like a tech chase from down throw, or in some spots, a down air. But the down strong is not your strongest kill option, so I don't really recommend pressing it until your opponent's at a pretty high percent. Nair is also a great kill move, but it most notably only kills off stage, which we've already touched on. Moving on to Orcane's disadvantage, he is sadly not known for escaping combos easily or without a scratch. However, there is a lot of ways to optimize your gameplay to take as little damage as possible with Orcane, or at least not die in one interaction. To start, let's look at how to get out of juggles early. Orcane's neutral air is frame 3, meaning that it's a pretty solid get off me tool if the opponent gets too close. It's small, so it's not optimal to spam, but it works in a pinch. Down air and up air are slower, but their hitboxes linger, allowing for less precise reversals. I personally find reversals to be a little bit risky, however, especially when being juggled. So I like to use forward air or down B to slow my fall and switch up my positioning. It can catch unsuspecting opponents off guard, and allow you to go to ledge for a safe landing. There's also times where using up B to escape an over-eager opponent and return to stage can be helpful. Obviously, this can be applied to a lot of spots at disadvantage, but I like it when I'm being juggled as an emergency exit. When recovering, be sure to know that side B does not snap the ledge. This leaves you super vulnerable if used wrongly. Luckily, there are 3 different distances for the move, so you have a bit of power to course correct, even if you think you'll be hit. You're also vulnerable before the hitbox of side B comes out, so be sure to avoid the opponent at all costs, since you'll never even trade when using the move. A lot of players use Bubble Butt after a wall jump to project themselves back onto stage and land a hit. This is sadly not great, however, since Bubble Butt's hitbox isn't huge and loses to a lot of moves. It's also pretty easy to parry, especially if the opponent sees it coming. It's not the worst option ever, especially when used purely for movement and not aimed to hit an opponent. However, it's pretty consistent to punish, so I can't advise using it more than once or twice a set as a mix-up, and definitely not as a primary recovery tool. When getting up from the ledge dash is always a great option. It allows Orcane to cover lots of ground in a short amount of time, and sometimes pop out swinging or in shield. Mixing up your ledge options is always important, however, since if you click one too much, you'll start to get called out. When getting up from being knocked down, remember that your special get up has some uses to help you escape scary moves, like a Loxodon up strong or a projectile flying at ya. It's not great as an offensive get up option in most cases, but you can use it to escape an overcommitted opponent. Finally, for our last tip for disadvantage, I gotta implore you to not spam your jump in disadvantage. Orca hopping is a tech that allows Orcane to get more distance on his up B by up B'ing at the peak of a jump, while holding shield to not teleport to his puddle. However, if you don't have a jump, this tech doesn't work at all. So you're forced to teleport to your puddle in a lot of spots you might not want to, leaving your opponent open to an avoidable kill. Before we wrap up with some quick tips, let's check out Orcane's best and worst stages. Orcane normally likes larger stages and matchups that need a puddle recovery. Characters that consistently apply pressure offstage against Orcane normally can't multitask and cover both a well-placed puddle and guard him from coming back to the ledge. Fire Capital is great for this. There's not really a stage that stands out as being abhorrently bad for Orcane, however. Hyperborean Harbor doesn't necessarily benefit him though, and due to the wall's positioning on the stage, Orcane can sometimes struggle if he doesn't have a puddle to help him get back. Before we go, let's take a minute to go through some rapid-fire Orcane tips. None of these tips really fit into other parts of the video, but I think they're pretty important to fully understand and grasp Orcane. When using Nair near the ground, you can hold the button and get a Nair bounce. This changes up Orcane's shield pressure, but the second hit is definitely not as good as the initial one. Orcane forward air propels him backwards. I've talked about this a good bit already, and it's called Bubble Butt if you weren't aware. But I'm always asked how to get the best movement for it. I like to press forward air with my C stick, and then input how far I want to move with my movement stick, so that I have more control over where he goes. Orcane Droplet can always be used to extend combos. I really like to use it offstage where moves like Nair wouldn't reach my opponent in time. You can choose to not slow fall your down B by pressing shield at the same time when in the air. This lets you land with your offensive option to open up more combos. I mentioned it earlier, but up air does have a bottom hitbox that spikes. This move has a good amount of use not only offstage but also on stage. However, it can be kinda hard to land. Up tilt has a 0.85 hit stun multiplier. So, to make sure that it combos, there are a few times where you might need to baby dash to connect moves together properly. A lot of Orcane's moves send down into the stage, promoting tech chasing or bubble traps. Be sure to know when to tech chase and when to try to get a combo with bubbles to fully threaten opponents. Mixing it up will keep them on their toes, and make it to where they can't rely on one option to escape over and over. Speaking of bubbles, you can choose a direction at the start of the move. If you think an opponent is going to DI left, you can point the bubbles left, or point them right to cover a right angle DI. When recovering, you can side B to the wall jump, and then B reverse a droplet. It can catch unsuspecting ledge guarders on stage, since the drop does poke a good bit above the ledge. You can also use your up B with no puddle to refresh ledge invincibility pretty quickly. This can let you do a rising Nair off stage to punish an over-aggressive opponent that would normally whiff you. If Maple's tethering to you, you can always up B and hit her for it. She'll teleport to where you're at on the puddle and get smacked. For our last tip, let's talk about the checkmate. Orcane can place a puddle at the edge of the stage while an opponent is recovering. Then, he can slide onto the ledge either by hydroplaning and shield, or wave dashing onto it. This will let him ledge hog their recovery. If the opponent decides to land on stage, you can drop from ledge and then up B. This kills opponents super early. Orcane's up B is risky, but it does have high knockback, punishing opponents for going high, but also forcing them to go high due to the ledge hog from earlier. This tech is pretty risky if you're not fast enough, however, so be sure to know your opponent's landing lag out of their up Bs. It's pretty easy on someone like Loxodont, but a bit scarier on someone like Zetterburn, and sadly near impossible on someone like Edelus. Thanks tons for watching. Let me know if you found this video helpful, or if I left anything out that you think should have been included. Big thanks to both Rimrim and Cabbage again for including a lot of tips and tricks and a handful of the gameplay footage included in this video. I'm working on sourcing more guides and informational videos like this for the channel, so if that's something you want to see more of, or want to help with, let me know down in the comments. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye for now!